This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Roth and Gorchow. The Democrats have their first candidate for governor. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson has long been expected to run for governor in 2026, and she announced Wednesday she is, in fact, running.
This makes Benson the third declared candidate in the race overall, joining State Senate Republican leader Eric Nesbitt and Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, a longtime Democrat who is actually now running as an independent. And more are sure to follow. Benson will have to win the Democratic nomination in the August 2026 primary. Zach, what does Benson, who has been Secretary of State for 6 years now, bring to that race, in your opinion?
Well, this is Benson's first run in a statewide Democratic primary. As the Secretary of State in the past, to get nominated, she only had to win at a convention, much smaller universe of voters. So she's going to start out with some real strengths in a Democratic primary. She's got strong statewide name recognition from her Secretary of State work, both with the branch offices and in her highly visible role as the state's chief election officer. This will be her fourth statewide campaign in the last 16 years. So the chances are, if you're a Democratic voter, you know who Jocelyn Benson is. And Benson has historically shown she can raise the money necessary to win. Women have really owned statewide Democratic primaries in the past 30 years. So if Benson is facing a man or multiple men in the August primary field, that also will accrue to her advantage. But she also has some challenges, doesn't she?
Obviously. I mean, Secretary of State historically has not been a great launching pad for higher office, running the branch offices where people get their driver's licenses and vehicle registrations renewed. I mean, even when it's done well, it doesn't exactly make voters excited. And elections operations, while more polarizing in the past 4 years, also traditionally aren't something that propels people to higher office. In fact, the last 5 Secretary of States who tried to run for higher level statewide office were all unsuccessful. You have to go all the way back to 1946 to find a Secretary of State who actually won the governorship.
80 years. Boy, that's a long time. As far as the Democratic primary, the question is, who else gets into that race? Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist seems like a definite maybe. That would be fascinating to see him in a race against Jocelyn Benson, but he'd have challenges of his own. It's obviously well-known Lieutenant Governor isn't the greatest launching pad to the governorship either. Probably the one potential Democrat out there that would scare the Benson camp is former U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, because he would bring huge name identification and resources to the race. Benson isn't a native Michigander either, but she has lived here for the last 20 years. And while Buttigieg did become a registered voter in Traverse City in 2022, it's safe to say Benson has put down roots here and he has not.
Now, let's presume for the moment that Benson wins the Democratic nomination. What are her general election prospects? It seems like Benson and Duggan are kind of competing for a lot of the same voters and the same donors.
That's exactly right, Cheyna. The same donors who are key supporters of Governor Whitmer also are longtime supporters of Duggan. That is a problem for Benson. And Benson will have to persuade Democratic voters or soft Democratic voters intrigued by Duggan that she's the Democrat in the race, and a vote for Duggan is effectively a vote for the Republican nominee. Benson has another natural hurdle, too. She's trying to become the first candidate for governor to succeed an outgoing governor of the same party since 1960. That is a tough hurdle to overcome.
So Benson's introductory video is really interesting. There's some signaling to Democrats that she's a fighter. There's a clip of pro-Trump demonstrators protesting as part of the Stop the Steal movement outside of her house after the 2020 election. She shows images of President Trump and Elon Musk promising to stand up to them.
And yet there's also some signals she knows she will have to find a way to differentiate herself from Whitmer, so voters know a vote for Jocelyn Benson isn't just 4 more years of the same, and voters are historically reluctant to elect a governor of the same party as the outgoing governor. And Benson was asked that question at a press conference on Wednesday as to how she would be different from Whitmer, and here's what she said.
The bottom line is I will be a governor whose work is defined by efficiency and transparency. And I'll also be a governor that will work with anyone in a collaborative way to ensure we are investing in our people and making Michigan the best place to call home.
There's certainly some tension between the Benson and Whitmer wings of the Michigan Democratic Party, and Benson hammering at efficiency and transparency is probably only going to exacerbate that. Governor Whitmer has taken heat for going back on a campaign promise to open the governor's office up to public records laws and for not disclosing donors to her nonprofit fund. Benson took particular aim at the efficiency of operations in the Whitmer administration at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Which is an interesting track to take. Transparency and government efficiency are not your typical statewide campaign themes, but we're just going to have to keep watching and see how this all unfolds. We're going to take a short break here, but stick around because when we come back, we're going to shift gears and discuss the debate in the state legislature about the new paid sick time law set to take effect in February. Coming up next is Zach's conversation with Danielle Atkinson of Mothering Justice, which backed the new law. Then later in the show, we'll have my conversation with Republican Representative Bill Schuette, who is helping lead the effort to change it. Stick around.
Welcome back to MichMash. I'm Zach Gorchow. Joining me now is Danielle Atkinson, founder and national executive director of Mothering Justice, which helped spearhead the Time to Care Citizens Petition in 2017 and 2018 that led to the law set to take effect February 21 that requires employers to provide 1 hour of paid sick time to their workers for every 30 hours worked, along with many other new changes. Danielle, welcome to MichMash.
Thanks for having me.
Danielle, let's hit the key points of the law you and your organization wrote and championed. I think that'll help us kind of set the base for this discussion. Besides the 1 hour of paid sick time for every 30 hours worked, subject to an annual limit, what are the other highlights of the law?
Yeah, it was really important when we started talking about the law and crafting it with experts that we thought about how people live, how people work, and how they love and care for their families. And so when we're thinking about that, we're thinking about the most vulnerable populations, people who work in small businesses that often are exempt from policies, individuals that are working to survive the effects of domestic violence, and how kids get sick and how parents get sick. So we wanted to make sure that this law covered safe days so that individuals who had to go to court or had to flee from a domestic violence situation were able to be covered, and all the circumstances around that. So, there are exceptions for if you weren't able to tell your employer right away that you needed earned sick time, or that you needed to take those increments of time off in smaller increments rather than an entire day. Because we know that, when Jimmy breaks his leg, he might be in the ER for 4 hours, but you might be able to still make the rest of your shift and earn the money that you need and save those sick times. So we really were in conversation with parents and caregivers around those instances. And that was really what crafted the law.
So let's kind of break the law down one piece at a time. Many employers have sick time policies where their employees get a block of sick time at the start of the year they can use as needed during the year. Maybe it's 5 days, maybe it's 10 days, or, however much. It appears under the law your group wrote that these employers would instead have to allocate paid time off based on hours worked instead of front loading it. Is that the case, or does your law allow for front loading sick time at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, there's nothing in the law that prevents front loading. And we also talked to Leo, as they are the government agency that will be enforcing this law. So that is fine to front load it. We just want to make sure that employees are not subject to any additional ramifications or disciplinary actions based on that. But that is completely fine.
Your law requires businesses with 10 or less employees to provide fewer hours of paid sick leave than those with more than them. But it's not an outright exemption. And you touched on this a little bit, that there's a concern among the supporters of this law that smaller businesses, smaller employers have been exempt historically from these kinds of things. Can you speak to that, why that was handled so that no matter the size of the employer, you got to provide paid sick time.
Yeah, because, my kids joke that I say it all the time, that everyone gets sick, but unfortunately, not everybody has time to get well. So it's so important that we do not exempt people from being able to have those same protections. Cancer doesn't care if you work for an employer that's got 25 employees or 23 employees, right? We have to make sure that individuals are covered, that large corporations can't maneuver and scurry around the law. And so we found with the people that are helped us craft this law, that this accommodation was the most fair and most workable for smaller businesses, but also offers that protection that every employee needs.
So one item business groups, as you know, they've been coming after this law and asking for changes. One item they've especially targeted is the prohibition on employers requiring advance notice from employees that they need to use sick time. In other words, an employer can no longer tell an employee, hey, you got to call in sick if you're going to be off that day. Instead, the critics of the law say employees could exercise 3 days of leave before the employer could require some evidence of illness from a doctor. Is that an accurate depiction of the law?
I mean, it's a depiction of the law. There is still, every employer has to accommodate for people not showing up for work. And then if I say I was in an emergency room, there's no way. If I'm unconscious, I can't tell you that I need that time off. And if I'm suffering an illness that's going to require me to be out or have to require other therapies or treatments, I'm going to need my pay, especially if I'm an employee of an employer that doesn't pay as well. And so it is important to accommodate for life, right? We have to make sure that people are not going to face retaliatory action because they were unconscious or they're fleeing an abusive spouse.
There is an argument from the business groups out there, and I'd like you to react to it, that they're saying things like, hey, look, people are going to be able to no show for 3 days before they have to say anything, and they don't even have to have a reason, and they're going to get paid. Is that a legitimate, serious concern? No,
I don't think so. I think we have to have a relationship with our employees. And I think it's funny that, this argument has kind of been like the business community and the nonprofit community. Nonprofit is a business. I have 30 employees, in which I have a more generous leave policy. If somebody comes back to work after missing work 3 days, we're having a conversation, right? We're having a conversation about what it means to work here, what this job needs, what this organization needs of them. And if they're not able to provide me a legitimate excuse for being out and not giving me notice, we're having a different conversation, right? And so it's about employee-employer relationship. And every employer worth their weight of salt has had this conversation, has understood what it means to have a legitimate reason for not being at work and an illegitimate reason for not being at work. And this is a straw man's argument by the business community who really protest any regulation.
So let's move to the proposed changes. There are bills pending in both the Senate, where Democrats are in control, and the House, where Republicans are in control. Let's start with the Democratic proposal in the Senate. Some highlights of what their bill would do is change the definition from a small business from less than 10 employees to less than 25. The bill would also allow employers to require advance notice and specifically let them front load sick time. It would remove language in the law that you and your group put together that creates a presumption the employer is in the wrong if an employee files a complaint. What's your reaction to this proposal from the Senate Democrats?
I'm really disappointed, right? I am a Democratic elected official. I chose Democrats as a group to be associated with because I believe we stand up for workers. We don't take away paid leave. I believe this was pressure put on by the business lobby, and Democrats felt they needed to accommodate. I've spoken to several Democrats in Senate saying that we're just not hearing from people. And I tried to make the case that the people who would be the first ones to call you are working full time and don't have paid sick time, right? And so we're going back and forth with that. But ultimately, I'm disappointed that they would propose something that would take away people's legal rights and protections, and also people's ability to care for themselves and their loved ones.
What's your confidence level that even though there's one Democrat who's introduced this, appears to have some supportive leadership, that other Democrats in the Senate and or Governor Whitmer, who of course is a Democrat, would put a stop to this and say, you know what, we're not going to support changes. We're going to let this take the law that was passed in 2018, set to take effect February 21. We're going to let it take effect.
Yeah, I up is down right now. I don't have a prediction or obviously a glass ball or whatever to predict what they're going to do. But we have had conversations with several senators who are disappointed as well in Senator Singh's bill, who don't understand what is going on and really came back to Lansing prepared to be the stopgap on bad things coming from the House and protecting workers. I also hope that Governor Whitmer will continue to show her support for earned sick time and paid leave in general by getting her veto pen ready if that time happens. And if she doesn't, we will hold her accountable because she has championed paid leave. She made it a pivotal point in her What's Next speech, and she promised that she would be a governor that supports and champions paid leave. So it would be against her own commitment and her own words to sign anything that would take away paid leave.
So now over in the House, I mentioned earlier the Republicans are the majority there. Their bill goes much further than what the Senate Democratic bill does. Probably the most significant change from the law that will take effect, February 21, is it declares any employer with fewer than 50 employees would be exempt outright from the paid sick time requirements. For those with 50 or more employees, there would be some similar changes to what the Senate Democratic bill has. What do you make of this piece of legislation?
It's out of touch with Michigan people. It's out of touch with families. Like I said to you before we started recording, I'm home with 5 children right now. That is my life, is balancing children who cannot go to school while I still have to work. What would it be like if I wasn't able to work from home? What would it be like if I had 3 kids sick because they had neurovirus, which is going around right now? And then I have neurovirus and I still have to go to work because I had to make the choice between caring for them and providing for them. And you're always going to pick providing for them because, the landlord doesn't take, sorry, I don't have paid sick time as an excuse for not getting the rent in. So they don't understand what people are going through in Michigan right now. I'm about to make breakfast. How much did I pay for eggs that I'm about to make? They just don't understand. And it's sad that we have to deal with this. But we are trying our hardest. And there was a committee hearing in the House, and that also spoke to how out of touch the Republicans are. They gave less than 24 hours notice as to what the time was. And then when we brought up people to speak about how they were caring for children with chronic illnesses, they weren't even able to testify. So how are you going to amend a law that is about to go into effect without even hearing from the people that it will affect the most?
So overall, what would be the best case scenario for you here? Is it this effort to change the law falls apart and your law takes effect as is? Are you feeling like you may have to look at some type of negotiation here to save as much of it as you can, or something else?
The best case scenario is that the Senate and the governor stop completely any change to the law. It goes into effect on February 21st. All elected officials monitor the law and how businesses are implementing it. We make observations from other states for bumps along the way. And we make accommodations on a systemic level, on a state level, for any instances that occur where we can help smaller businesses that need help with implementation. And also, we're joined by the business lobby, who have been opposing this tooth and nail from 2018 to make sure that all businesses are able to implement this effortlessly and without any hiccups. That's the best case scenario. Next after that, Mothering Justice.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Next after that, Mothering Justice will continue to fight for every worker. If there is any change, if there's any worker left out, Mothering Justice will do everything they can. And that doesn't stop at introducing legislation, thinking about another ballot initiative. We will continue the fight. But unfortunately, if we have to do one of those things, that means our attention is taken away from other working class family issues like childcare, maternal mortality, basic needs. Those are all other issues that we want to put more effort behind, but this continues to be a fight that we have to fight.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us on MichMash.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a short break. Coming up, Cheyna talks with State Representative Bill Schuette, a critic of the sick time law as written, about House Republican efforts to change it. Stick around.
Welcome back to MichMash. I'm Cheyna Roth, and I'm joined now by Republican Representative Bill G. Schuette. Representative Schuette, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Appreciate you having me back on the podcast. You know, I listen every Friday, and every Friday afterwards, I have the very catchy intro and outro music stuck in my head. So I'm glad I could actually contribute something back to what is something that goes through my brain every weekend.
It is incredibly catchy. Thank you for noticing that. It does get stuck in my head as well. So we're here today to talk about the minimum wage and paid sick time bills that are up in the House that passed the State House this week. Why don't we start by having you walk us through the bills that the House Republicans crafted? What are the big points that you are looking to change in these laws that are set to go into effect in February?
Yeah, and just to back up a step, the reason we're in this position is because Michigan Supreme Court issued a ruling last year, obviously that I disagree with, a lot of legal experts disagree with too, but basically ruling that the legislature in 2018 acted incorrectly in altering what was a ballot initiative drawn up by a far left out of state activist group. And so that means on February 21st, Michigan small businesses, workers, restaurant industry is staring down a freight train that is racing after them. And so what the House Republicans are doing in the bills that we introduced and the committee hearings that we held last week is legislation that would restore the tip credit so that restaurant servers that rely on their hard-earned tipped wages to pay for their children's education, balance their books, pay for their grocery bills. We preserve those hard-earned tip wages. And then we also protect Michigan small businesses and employers from what is really an unworkable top-down sick time policy that's, again, trying to be shoved on the state from a far-left activist group. So
just to clarify, there would still be an increase to the state's minimum wage no matter what. That's the plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, that's one of the things that I think shows how good faith the Republicans have been in this process. We could have, taken the approach of saying, our way or the highway, we're going to go back to the way that things were before this court ruling. We're trying to negotiate in good faith. We're trying to present an option. And we realize that the minimum wage, across our state, has grown just by, virtue of the economy and with inflation. So we'd increase the minimum wage, but we'd preserve the tip credit at 39%, which is really important. That protects the pocketbooks of those going to restaurants and also protects the hard-earned tips of servers, making sure they still get that vital source of their income.
I want to dig into the sick time a little bit. So an estimated 1.2 million Michigan workers and a vast majority of Michigan businesses would not be guaranteed sick time under the Republican plan. What is the thought process there? Why not give those people sick leave?
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, if you will, Cheyna, because I'm sure that, I'm not sure the employee size of WDET, but let's, choose your partner, Gongwer. I'm sure they have fewer than 50 employees. And I'm sure that they also have a fairly generous form of paid time off and sick leave. And the same is true of most companies under the size of 50 employees in the state of Michigan. But what this February 21st deadline, after that February 21st deadline, most of those small businesses would have to adopt what is a really unworkable policy. So we're not eliminating the good, generous paid time off or sick leave policies that many small businesses currently have. What we're saying is you have the flexibility to offer whether you want to front load your paid time off to your employees, or you want to have a leave bank. We're giving them flexibility to manage how they are. Right now, on February 21st, everyone is going to have to follow 3 days of no call, no show, where anyone can not show up to work, no doctor's notice, no warning at all to their employees, no action can be taken. And if you're a small business, you have to track that sick time in 5-minute increments. I mean, maybe if you're a large multinational corporation, you can have the HR protocols and procedures to track in 5-minute increments. My corner store down the street here in Midland, they're not going to be able to track that in 5 minutes. It's going to mean they have to, shut their doors. And it's about protecting workers and protecting our current sick time policies that many employees are already offered.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of who's being protected, it does kind of feel like there's a push-pull here between businesses and employees. Zach, my co-host, recently spoke with Danielle Atkinson of Mothering Justice. They are opposing the changes that the Republicans are presenting, and they're saying that this isn't fair to employees, that they want wage increases. But businesses are saying that this is something that would hurt their bottom line. I guess, how do you balance what the employees are saying and what the opponents are saying with what the businesses say that they need?
Yeah, and I would also say, Cheyna, that I think this is about protecting both employees and small businesses. It's both sides, and that's why we saw restaurant workers, flooding the committee testimony room on Tuesday and Thursday when we had these hearings of last week. But it's also why you're seeing a lot of workers saying, "Hey, I like my current structure of paid time off. I like being able to bank my leave. I like what my company is having." And then also, if we're forcing this Mothering Justice's ideal sick time policy across our state, there's going to be fewer jobs. And it'd be better to have small businesses with flexibility in their paid time off policies than this one size fits all top down dogma that means that small businesses are going to close and there's going to be fewer opportunities. So that's really the dichotomy there. And I think that's why you see everyone from the Black Business Alliance to the Michigan Chamber of Commerce to, hundreds of restaurant workers coming out in support of this legislation.
The whole issue started as a ballot initiative, and you kind of mentioned this before. So after the signatures were gathered, both proposals first went to the legislature, where the Republican majority in 2018 voted to adopt them and then put them into law, which would keep them off the ballot, but they also amended them in the lame duck session that year and really made huge changes. And that's what you referred to earlier, that the Michigan Supreme Court said was unconstitutional. My question for you is, I guess, why do all of this? It was a ballot initiative. Why not just let it go to the voters and let the voters decide if this was something that they wanted in this way?
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask the 2018 legislature, who, by the way, was acting on a strong attorney general's opinion and had that opinion upheld in every single level of court until they reached the Supreme Court that went the other way. So I think the legislature was acting on solid legal backing. But right now, in the 103rd legislature, we're focused on solutions. And if we just let this go to the businesses and just let this go to restaurants, it means workers are going to lose their tips. Small businesses are going to close. And, you heard from the head of the Black Business Alliance testify in front of the committee last week. And if a lot of her members are forced to close because of this sick time policy, they don't have the same access to capital to then, when the legislature fixes it 6 months down the road, to open back up. No, they're out of business for good. And that would be a shame if the legislature failed to act.
The Senate Democrats have said that they have an alternative plan to change the state's minimum wage and sick laws. Those have not been debated yet or brought to committee yet. Have you seen these plans? Have you had conversations with Senate Democrats on this issue yet?
Yeah, we've had some initial conversations, and I'm just encouraged to view the trajectory of this debate because, Cheyna, remember, in November and December of last year, what we were hearing from the Senate Democrats is, "Hey, there's no problem here. What fire? There's no issue that needs to be solved at all." Now we saw among the first bills that they introduced in this new session were fixes to both the sick time and to the tip credit. So I see in that some progression, some understanding that there actually is a problem that needs to be solved to protect Michigan employees and small businesses. And my hope is, after we pass these bills out of the House chamber, we're going to be able to, sit down and negotiate and work on this. And, Cheyna, I would say there's some really hyper partisan issues that you deal with in Lansing. There's your right to works, your prevailing wages, your gun controls. This was something that passed without opposition out of committee last week. It had 15 votes, and that is significant, right? And I think that means we should be able to sit down and get this figured out.
So is there some room to boost the minimum wage for tipped workers? Now, 38% of the state's regular minimum wage. Many states, Florida and Ohio included, have a tipped minimum wage that is 50% or more than the regular minimum wage. And those states have not been saying that their restaurant industry is collapsing or tipped workers are getting hosed on tips. So I guess, are you looking at other states for potential reference in these?
Yeah.
And is there some room there?
Couple of things on that. First off, in the legislative package that we've introduced, we're already raising the minimum wage. So they're getting 39% of what is a higher, minimum wage right now. So the base minimum wage that restaurant workers are going to be getting is already going up. And two, how the tip credit works is if they're, have a slow day at the restaurant and they don't bring in enough on tips, they're going to be able to get the minimum wage then regardless. And secondly, as far as looking for other states for case studies, we saw the Mothering Justice One Fair Wage playbook enacted in the District of Columbia and Chicago. And those were two cities with thriving, strong restaurant scenes and a really professional hospitality industry, both of which have been decimated. And that's why Massachusetts, not exactly a conservative mecca, rejected a similar ballot initiative in last year. And I think that really shows that the data and the empirical information is on our side.
So finally, I wanted to ask you about this select committee on protecting Michigan employees and small business.
It's a mouthful.
It is a little bit. The SICAPM. Anyway, so you are chair of this committee, which has passed these particular bills to the House floor. But obviously, this was the first big issue for the committee. But what are the other types of legislation that this committee is potentially going to be looking at?
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen. I think we had a very professional and we followed through on the committee process really well last week. We heard testimony from both sides. We allowed One Fair Wage to come and testify. We allowed the restaurant workers to come and testify. Members of the Republicans or Democrat Party wanted to make comments. They were given time. So I thought we had a good committee. We had robust debate, and that meant it was discharged in a bipartisan. It was voted out rather in a bipartisan manner to the House floor. So we'll find out what other issues present. I think the committee demonstrated it was able to act swiftly but deliberately, and I think that's something we can always use more of in Lansing. So,
Representative Bill Schuette, thank you so much for joining me here on MichMash.
Thanks for having me.